Merry Christmas! Yes, even in China, not a majority Christian country, this time of year brings on a display of lights and decorations, the sounds of jingle bells and Christmas carols playing non-stop in shopping centers. How has this worldwide phenomenon become so popular here? How is it done differently in China? And what's happening with Christmas in the rest of the world? Today, to talk about Christmas, culture, and commercialization, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Li Jingdao from the Beijing Foreign Studies University, Andy Mark, a regular guest speaker, now resident fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and of course, Anna Tangen, author and columnist. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Hi guys, as you may have noticed, on the streets of Beijing, other first or second tier cities, in state departments, you see so many decorations and Christmas trees. So there's obviously a festive atmosphere other than the Chinese Lunar New Year. This is perhaps yet another time to celebrate. So I'd like to know, and also don't forget in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, which are considered a part of China, we see celebrations there. And yet one article in the US media says cancellation of Christmas trees happened in some quarters of the Chinese society. What do you think of this kind of a message that some people in China deliver to the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, I don't think cancellation is a wide range practice. Actually, we can still see a lot of commercialization of Christmas going on in China, but there are in some shopping malls, we see a certain degree of disappearance of trees. I think it's an overreaction to what is originally a commercial festival. It's not even a cultural festival in China. And among most non-Christians in China who celebrate Christmas, it is more Santa's holiday, not Jesus Christ's holiday. So I think it's an overreaction.
Christmas may not be a cultural festival for China, but it's certainly a symbol of Western culture in China, which is increasingly integrated with the world in the age of globalization. Andy, and what do you think of the general atmosphere of having a festival in mainland China?
Well, I'll go first. I think first of all, you make a really great point. It's I think more of a cultural phenomenon, and not just a cultural phenomenon, but I think it's a way, especially for urban young people, to signal their cosmopolitan nature. Because a lot of young people like to go out, they like to celebrate Christmas because they think it's the hip, cool thing to do. And I think that is the main driver on the consumer side. And then on the business side, of course, it's an opportunity for restaurants, malls, retail stores to boost their sales.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit on the other side. The commercialization is not really what Christmas was supposed to be about. This is something that was popularized by basically, books. Dickens made it into a family thing, and Coca-Cola made it into a commercial thing. So when you start looking at this idea that what is supposed to be a spiritual holiday, a giving of thanks, happening around the winter solstice, talking about the end of one year, the beginning of a new year, how you should act appropriately and reflect on what has happened and what is going to happen. It has now become just about not jingle bells, but cash bells.
Cash register bells.
Cash register bells. And that's the sad part. But I think it would be more useful, even if you don't believe in Christianity. The issue is there a time to reflect and think about what you can do for others? At a time when China has passed 40 years of incredible development, there are still people who have been left behind. You and I were at a party which was thrown for children who had been left behind. It was done by the China Development Foundation, which is a charitable group. What they had done is they brought these kids in from Shanxi.
Oh, by the way, may I proudly share my experience as one of the image ambassadors of Care for Children, a charity foundation based in Hong Kong. Following me was before me was the tennis player, Zhang Depei, the Chinese-American tennis player. Let's look at this background picture. What do you make of the message that painter of this cartoon show delivers to our Western audience? Do you think, despite pockets of alleged ideological backlashes from some local government or agencies at the local level, the Chinese authorities are well prepared to be culturally integrated into the rest of the world? Now, for example, despite our cultural differences and political disputes, there's one thing in common between the West and China on this occasion of Christmas Eve: family reunions.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yes, yeah. That's what I remember most vividly about American family celebration of Christmas. When I was a student working on my degrees in the United States, I was invited to American families, American homes, to celebrate Christmas. So the biggest thing was families reuniting and catching up with each other and sharing love and exchanging gifts. I think that's a very great tradition.
And don't you think most of the Christmas gifts and decorations were actually exported from Yiwu, a small city in Zhejiang province?
Well, but Christmas actually has a much longer history than that. But you're right, Yang Rui. But I think the point also that Einar makes, I think, is a great one, is that really the spirit of Christmas, whether you're a Christian or not, is about generosity. It's about sharing. Enjoying the fellowship.
Are you talking smart about
friends.
universal values? They are politically sensitive for some of the people in China.
But actually,
it's not universal. Being human is not a universal.
Emphasizing
well,
family
that's
value,
very
family
decent,
love.
very noble. Something we should share together on this particular occasion.
For instance, you, as a student in Cardiff, you wandered the streets of Christmas.
Come on, I don't want to go back to that
the issue
particular
is,
part of my story.
The Christmas spirit would have been if somebody who knew you or even didn't know you saw you out there and said, listen, why don't you come in and warm yourself by our fire and have something to eat, and let's share what this is. And I think that's really what Christmas
That's
should be
Christmas
about.
Eve back in 1994. I was left so lonely in the street of Cardiff, a small city in southern Britain, and I saw with great envy family reunions under the Christmas tree.
How come you were not invited to anyone's home?
Because I didn't bother to make friends with the local Britons who were sometimes very, pretentious and arrogant.
Really?
Yeah, Pride and Prejudice, that's the name of a book,
I had a totally
right?
different experience. I remember almost all my professors and my American cohort students, they would ask, Jinjiao, where are you going? Are you going back to China? Would you like to celebrate Christmas with us? And there are always very nice Chinese-American families.
In fact,
they will never leave
I was
any
sent
Chinese
to the UK for a one-year study for for MA. I was expelled by the British Council from Britain, where I wanted to study a PhD for a PhD degree. Where had I been in the United States, I would have been accepted by my professor of media studies. Yang Rui, we open our arms, give you a bear hug. But the British government says, no, you've got to go home.
But you're still a hopeless Anglophile. Look at your dress.
Well, Italian, not British, by the way. I just came back from Milan.
But I was going to say, the other thing, at least in the United States, is not just your colleagues and your classmates at school that tend to be very welcoming during Christmas time, but a lot of the churches as well. So they'll hold dinners, potlucks, so nothing very fancy, but again, it's about the spirit of sharing and generosity. And those, I think that also is a great example of, I think, the positive part of Christmas and just having this ritual of sharing.
That is also the biggest difference between young people celebrating Christmas in China, in big cities, and American families celebrating Christmas. For Americans, it's family-oriented. But for Chinese young people, it's going to restaurants, going to malls.
I say not just family, but there's a spiritual component which is not necessarily religious in that, because it's for the purely religious. It's about celebrating the birth of Jesus and
by the way, one day after the birth of Jesus Christ is the birthday of Mao Zedong, our late leader, founding father of the PRC.
Yeah, I heard that actually on the eve
December
of
26th.
on his birth, on the eve of his birth, if you go to his hometown, there will be tons of people going there, just waiting for the turn of the 26th to celebrate his birthday. Actually, I've seen a lot of news broadcasts about that.
Isn't it a coincidence that Jesus Christ and a late Chairman Mao's birthday happened to be so close. This is
one after
something like a
another.
myth, right?
Both
Well,
transformative on their world.
Both
Yeah,
transformative.
well, yes, but I don't know if
Both
that's
are icons.
But okay, let's talk about the.
But definitely, the Christmas in China is not much about Jesus Christ. Maybe among the churchgoers, among
very little.
Protestants, very, very little. Most people, I asked actually for your talk, I did some background research. I asked a lot of people, mostly they know would be Santa Claus, reindeer, coming down, giving gifts. That's
From
what
the chimney.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Coming down the
Let
chimney.
me give you one story that happened, that I experienced at least 22 years ago in Harbin, capital city of the Heilongjiang province. I was there to cover a story about religious freedom, religious rallies in the local church. And I was guided by a representative of the local Civil Affairs Bureau, 民政局. They care about they are those guys who are in charge of religious affairs. I was impressed by a big crowd in the local church, but all of them are pensioners and retirees. Then I turned to this local government official, asking her why we fail to see any young face in the big crowd. She said, "Don't worry, young Ray. On each Friday, without exceptions, we have a big crowd of young people converging here. They are the true Christian believers." And the second story I want to share with you is Hu Xijin, editor-in-chief of Global Times, which is said to be the political tabloid of a People's Daily. Now, he posted a photo on the social media about pushing a wheelchair that his mother was confined to, and he took her to a local church. By the way, Hu Xijin must be a member of the Communist Party. He said, "I don't share the faith with my mother. My mother is a believer of Christianity. But why shouldn't I send her to a place where she finds her faith?"
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But you know, faith is an inspiration to do good deeds.
Yeah.
And let's think about all the children, the left behind children in China's provinces and things like that. I mean, what happens to them? This is the things. If you have a really good heart, whether you have faith in Christianity or faith in human beings, you should be out there doing something about it. It's uplifting. This is what the Christmas spirit should be about. It's about, China got where it is through sacrifice. And that sacrifice meant investing in a world and trying to make it better. So why not do something about that?
Yeah. Like two friends of mine, yesterday they celebrated Christmas by spending time with the children of the convicts. They're serving their terms.
Yes.
So that's a way of
and that's very
sharing
common
care,
in the U.S.
care.
too. A lot of families, again, they may be, I think the American formulation is you can be spiritual without being religious. And what a lot of families will do is their whole family, they'll go with their kids to a soup kitchen to volunteer to feed homeless people, or maybe go to prisons or things like that, but to do something to give back. And I think part of that is...
Have you ever done that?
I have, actually.
So have I.
Yeah.
And that's really what Christmas is about.
But I think the issue, though, here is that, in a way, we could think of this as a kind of an enlightened self-interest, because clearly, by going to help other people, you're doing something good for them. But actually, if you look at it from a psychological perspective, we're happiest when we're just not being selfish, but when we actually feel like we're contributing to something larger than ourselves. And I think that also is, I think, a good reminder of, during Christmas, because it happens every year.
And it's also a season of expressing appreciation of each other.
Yes,
especially
very much so.
Some English language teachers, they want to carry on this tradition of celebrating Christmas among her students, because that's the time she will ask them to write cards, exchange cards to each other, and just saying what I appreciate of you. It's a very good tradition. We do not have anything like that in any Chinese holidays.
And since you went back to my years of Cardiff, not years, but a little bit more than 1 year stay in the UK back between 1993 and 94, let me tell you what happened in the early days of my arrival in Cardiff. I heard knocks on the door, almost at least once a week. It turned out to be a local priest who wanted very much to convince me in accepting what they believe. Most of the Chinese students have the same experience in Cardiff, and I believe in other cities of the UK in the early 1990s. I don't know what's happening these days. But I said, no, 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 I'm not ready yet. I'm not prepared to accept any spreading of the Gospels. But some of the Chinese students did listen very carefully and patiently because they wanted to practice English.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, did he invite you home for Christmas?
No.
Ah.
No. I would give a second thought if I had been invited by the priests to share their faith. It's simply because of the same reason, English learning. I mean, they speak very simple English, easy to understand. So that's the reason why we have.
But there's also a very
conversations.
important, I think, cultural learning opportunity here as well, because
Yes,
I mean, we
indeed.
mustn't forget that the roots of Western civilization are Judeo-Christian.
Exactly.
So the Bible,
Yeah.
Jesus, Christmas, these are not just kind of religious rituals, but they
Yeah.
actually really are profoundly linked to
It's very
Western
important
culture.
to learn
And
the
so are all of
history
them,
and
yeah.
practice.
And so
That's
are-
how I went to Xuanwu Church when I was an undergrad student majoring English. I had to make an effort to go to Xuanwu, but it was so crowded. It was in the late 80s, 1980s and early 1990s. It was so crowded. If I was late, I would never be able to get in.
Just
It's
a
a
few
very
minutes,
important part of.
That's a very good story.
Yeah.
Let me finish the other half of my story in
Okay.
Harbin,
Right.
the capital city of Xinjiang. Why young students and young people converged in the church every Friday? Then I asked the local government official why they decided, young people in Harbin decided to adopt the faith of Christianity. She gave me a few reasons. First of all, some of them were left jobless. They needed something spiritual to show up their confidence and morale, to have the guts to survive the vicissitudes of life. And second, after years of opening up, some of the young people inevitably came under influence from the West, such as Christian culture. A third is values became plural with the end of the Cultural Revolution. So young people who were educated in university, they decided to open their eyes and the mind and take a closer look at what Christianity is all about. So these are the three major reasons why young people choose to go to a church every Friday.
I think it's not just young people, but when you look at, whenever people confront a very severe crisis and they feel they have nowhere to turn, a lot of times, that makes them open to adopting a spiritual religious practice. And sometimes they're taken advantage of as well, because there are, cults or religions that also, have some ulterior motives. But, we look in the U.S. With the experience of African Americans in slavery. I mean, because of those very difficult conditions, many of them adopted Christianity. So I think that's, quite common, not just for young people. And also, I think when people feel a spiritual vacuum, which we're seeing in modern China, that as people become materially successful, that may feel their lives lack a greater sense of purpose, that they look either to Buddhism or maybe Christianity or other spiritual practices.
With the end of the Cold War, we did raise concerns about faith reconstruction and value reorientation, because in the Cultural Revolution during the Cold War, everybody was supposed to be, or was required to accept communism as the only faith. That's still somehow the case officially. But let me go back to the issue of Christianity. What do you think of the current thoughts that may cross the mind of Pope Francis, who is said to be a socialist, who is so critical of the Wall Street?
Well, he's critical of consumerism and putting
Capitalism,
putting material
consumerism.
things above the interests of human beings, and I think he's quite right. I mean, the same churches that bring you the spiritual sustenance are also the same ones that did terrible things throughout history, and in whose name a lot of terrible things are happening as we speak. So, I mean, there's two sides to religion: the organized part, which can be quite destructive, and the spiritual part, which can be quite nourishing. And you have to be very, very careful about which one you're inviting into your home.
Yeah.
And do you guys believe China is ready to formally, officially establish ties with the Vatican? That means Taiwan would be very, very sad.
Yeah.
Because the Vatican would have to sever official ties with Taiwan.
But it's an unusual situation because nowhere else in the world has the Vatican agreed to have a secondary power nominating bishops and things like that.
That's
so
the compromise the Vatican would have to consider very carefully. The price they have to pay for, having official nomination by the Chinese authorities about the bishop here.
But I think this is only like one manifestation of this larger phenomenon that we're seeing. That, I think the West has been very, very self-referential and, in some sense, very parochial in believing that their way is the only way and the right way. And what we're seeing is that it's not that the world is changing China, which it is, of course, but that China is also changing the world. And, with the Vatican allowing China a role in appointing bishops, that may be, many traditionalists might see this as some abomination. But in fact, there are very, I think, legitimate reasons why this makes sense in China, and the Chinese system is different.
You would overly challenge the argument. It is under the Chinese communist leadership that China has undergone tremendous changes, economically at least, over the past 4 decades. Having said this, when we look at the clashes, if any, between Christianity and communism, let's go back to what happened towards the end of the Cold War in Poland. Pope John Paul II was a Pole, and he deserves credit for averting bloodshed when General Jaruzelski was about to follow order from Moscow. In fact, Gorbachev didn't give any apparent hints that the use of force should be employed to spell the protesters in the streets by solidarity and union. I went to Poland and I took a look at the photos in their hundreds, in their thousands, in the site of the solidarity unit in Gdańsk, the shipyard, which was the cradle of the movement. Christianity could help ease tensions and avert bloodshed.
And Christianity is not necessarily the antithesis of communism, especially in terms of saving people or caring for the poor, for the underclass. I want to say, just as we were discussing earlier, Pope Francis, he has the tradition of liberation theology, which was very big in Latin America, and they used the religious ideas to launch a kind of social movement similar to a class struggle.
Is he a fan of egalitarianism?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's not like Christianity or religion can't really do constructive things to curb the gap of the rich and the poor, or to, Christianity can help promote equality or social economic.
It can, but it's an unelected body that is trying to interfere, and if it's doing that, it's seen as an unelected body.
By the way, Cuba is part of Latin America. What happens there following the passing away of Fidel Castro? Do you think their control on religion could be relaxed a little bit?
Oh no, many in Cuba still identify themselves as Catholic. It's still
really?
Hispanic
so they can have two at the same time. Actually, a couple of years ago, some students told me that they were encouraged to become party members by not severing their religious belief. But somehow, recently, this trend is going in a different direction. But it has not always been like very severe clash between the religious organization and the party.
You have so many different religious organizations who are at loggerheads with each other, and I don't know that China is anxious to have people pushing theology through the door slots or visiting doors and saying you should join my church.
But in this sense, I mean, the Roman Catholic Church is much better because, I mean, there is the Vatican, so you're dealing with one organization.
It depends on who's in charge of it. I think there are different views in terms of your own personal views, in terms of whoever the Pope is and what particular agenda they're pushing. So I don't think that you can just say this is completely wonderful. It's,
I mean, it's a single institution you're dealing with versus Protestantism. There's multiple organizations, but you're right. I mean, I think the Pope
one
matters
institution
a lot.
or many. I mean, we can.
Jindal and gentlemen, I hate to go back to the U.S.-China relationship, the trade war, those stuff, the stereotyped ones. But however, people are talking about whether we're going to go to Cold War. or new Cold War, partly because ideologically we don't see eye to eye on every issue. However, we've been talking about the diversification of faith in this country inevitably, despite the dominant role of the Chinese Communist Party. That's the fact. We cannot deny this. Do you think those hawks who surround the presidency of Donald Trump also know anything about the diversification of faith in the People's Republic of China? If they decide to adopt a hostile attitude, do you think they're going to lose not only one generation of the Chinese, so they're going to lose the mind and heart of many more to come, because they have no knowledge, ideas of the new realities that evolved from the new realities here.
No, that is happening. I mean, every time you have more, every day you have more and more stories. You can go back and count and look at China in a negative. How many stories are negative on China? They have been building up over the last few years, and it's a constant refrain. And the effect of this is that people who are Chinese feel that they are being victimized, that they're being singled out for being the villain all the time. And this, along with faith or whatever kind of issue they want, whether it's economics or ideology, by pushing this, you are creating a gap between these countries, which could be very dangerous.
I don't say this is ideological, unfortunately. I mean, I think it really is fundamentally about power. And the United States feels very insecure. I mean, we could look at Japan as a parallel, that when Japan's economy was growing so quickly, the U.S. felt very threatened and felt something had to be done. And I think, unfortunately, this is, I think, the same dynamic playing out. And what one can hope, there was an article in Bloomberg today that I think had a very optimistic headline. It was, the U.S., we're no longer number one, get over it, right? Meaning that, you know, it's natural that a country of 1.3 billion people with an economy growing so quickly is going to surpass the United States, and rather than fight it, perhaps to gracefully and intelligently accommodate it, I think would be a much better path.
Yes. Huang Yuchuan, a former home resident of the World Bank in China, said in one of the discussions in the studio that U.S. and China were, I must be aware of the tense, were the two major continental economies, which means you have a very big domestic market. And that is a lure, indeed, a big appeal for Wall Street and American investors. By the way, when you talk about dynamic economies, in fact, in the estimation of a very senior scholar from a think tank in Beijing, whenever a major economy accounts for over 60% of the U.S. GDP, you're going to have a trade war. Japan is no exception in the 1980s.
Things have changed dramatically. The U.S. does not have the same economic heft it had back then.
I hate to go back to the economic or geopolitical issues. As part of our conclusion of this very cheerful discussion about Christmas, as part of the effort to conclude 2018, an eventful year, what would be the keyword in your vocabulary to sum up the spirituality of Christmas or the festive atmosphere? Each of you should give your own keyword.
Inclusiveness.
Inclusiveness, and yours?
Hope.
Sacrifice.
And me? Love. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.